Jaire Alexander refused to meet with Green Bay media on Monday, saying he's not sure if he's going to be here next year and he wouldn't have anything positive to say anyway. Plus, Lily Zhao helps us sort through the wreckage of the Packers' 2024 season.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast to iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers, the #1 Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. We hope you like starting your day with us as much as we like starting our day with you. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Jaire Alexander, as part of exit interviews on Monday, did not want to meet with the Packers media. Fine. But he did give a reason. He said he wasn't sure if he's going to be here next year, and he wouldn't have much good to say anyway. I like the honesty. I respect it. We're going to have more conversations about this coming up with Lily Zhao in a little bit and more from the Eagles game. We're going to basically spend the week breaking down this Eagles game because I think it's going to tell us a lot about where the Packers go in the future. But this Jaire Alexander story is too big to not talk about here. I wondered aloud a couple weeks ago when it was announced that Jaire Alexander was going to have surgery if we had seen the last of Jaire Alexander. That was not merely speculation. There have been burblings, I would say going back to at least last year. Remember, he got suspended. There was the captain's incident. Matt LaFleur mentioned it was not just one incident, and this was not just about him not liking Joe Barry, that defense, not getting to travel, those kinds of things. It appears now, the reasons are almost irrelevant at this point, because in this moment, as we stand here now, it looks clear Jaire Alexander's career in Green Bay is over. And so that raises important questions about where the Packers go at corner, which was already, I think, a position where they could use some buttressing. And we'll talk more in depth about all these positions of need as we move through the offseason, if you're new to us here and have not gone through an offseason with us. But it is worth noting that not having Jaire Alexander is not the reason the Green Bay Packers lost on Sunday against Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown and Dallas Goedert and Jalen Hurts and one of the top 3 offensive lines in the league. The Green Bay Packers gave up 131 passing yards. Guys were covered all day. Dan Orlovsky did a breakdown of like, oh, Jalen Hurts was rusty. No, he wasn't. The Packers coverage team was great. They had read the Eagles' mail. They knew what they were going to run consistently. And their guys were ready. Carrington Valentine played well, aside from getting gronked by Dallas Goedert. Keyshawn Nixon played well as a defensive player. Sounds like, by the way, he's not going to be doing kick returns anymore. He wants to be cornerback 1. We'll see about that. But I don't think it's a bad group. There's no elite cornerback 1. That's true. But the Vikings don't have one of those now. Maybe a bad example. But the Rams don't have one of those. The Lions don't have one of those. Now, they drafted Terrion Arnold. We'll see. They traded for Carlton Davis. But he's a solid player. We're going to come back to the Carlton Davis part of this in a second, actually. They need to add some depth, and it would be nice if they could find a player that would raise their ceiling, but I think really what you need is a floor raiser. Coverage especially is a weak link system. It's about how bad your worst player is, not how good your best players are, and we've seen this. Now, Jaire Alexander in 2020, when he was an all-pro, he played awesome against Mike Evans, but he couldn't cover Mike Evans every play, or they didn't have him cover Mike Evans on every play. And so you can just go somewhere else. One elite corner does not make an elite defense. 11 solid to good players makes an elite defense. That's really what it is. And I think you look at the guys that are out there on Sunday, I think you can say pretty confidently that they have 10 solid to good players. I think they're an edge rusher short. They need that year 3 jump from Lucas Van Ness. They need him to become a real player, or they need to add someone. Otherwise, like you're pretty good. Like given the way that Quay Walker was playing at the end of the year, now is he a long-term piece for you? What can Tyron Hopper be? Those are all questions for another day. So the future of Jaire Alexander, if it's not on Green Bay, what is it and what is the mechanism? He's too good a player to just cut. And it does save the Packers some money, about $7 million, a little less. He would have been $25 million on the cap if he were there. It's 18-ish million dead if they cut or trade him. But you're saving money for future years because he's owed serious cashola here. Now, the beauty of it, if you're going to trade him, let's say, $16 million and $18 million are the 2 years in base salary left. That is basically markup on the Carlton Davis deal that the Lions just traded for. He would be like the 18th or 12th or something like that highest paid corner in the league. Like, it's not anything crazy by any means. And there's a whole group of guys like 18 and up and then 20s. He's well below that at 16 million. 16 million is what like a middling to low end cornerback 1 costs. Well, we're 2 years removed from Jaire Alexander being an all pro in 2022. Now I understand he's played 14 games since then, but he's 27 years old. Obviously was unhappy with his situation in Green Bay, and or the Packers were unhappy with him for myriad reasons. A change of scenery looks like it's the best for both of these players. That makes him appealing as a trade piece. So let's say you want to go big game hunt. Well, what about a familiar face in New York? Devontae Adams, they're probably going to cut him. He's got big time money left. 2 years on his deal. He's not playing on that anywhere. So they're going to cut him. The only reason you would trade for Devontae Adams in the next 4 months, and I guess he can't be traded for, anyway, the only reason you would do that is because you want to assure you get him in the negotiating window for your own. So you give up a 6th round pick or something like that, a 5th round pick maybe, to get Devontae Adams at this point, knowing the Jets are going to cut him. Well, if the Packers want to cut Jaire Alexander, he's in a similar position where he can't command a huge amount unless you're trading for someone else's problem. And in this case, Devontae Adams is the Jets' problem, not because he is a problem. His contract is a problem. If he were on the books for $10 million next year, you wouldn't have a problem. You just keep him and figure it out. He wants to win. He said recently on Kay Adams' show, he would not rule out coming back to Green Bay. What if he'd take the Mike Evans deal, 2 years, 40? You want to redo that? I would sign up for that in a heartbeat for a dozen reasons. You want to try and pry Max Crosby away from the Raiders? You want to call the Chargers about Khalil Mack? How about having an all-pro corner that you can set? Understanding, like, he's cheap. He's disgruntled potentially, but he's young and talented, and everyone knows that he's talented. Everyone's seen him play in big games. If you're getting the best version of Jaire Alexander, he is well worth a flyer, especially if you're a team like, hey, we could really use a corner. If you're the Chargers, you could really use a corner. Now, is he a Jim Harbaugh guy? I don't know. But if you're the Raiders, could you talk yourself into them if you're being run by Tom Brady and Jaire Alexander picked you off twice in an NFC Championship game not that long ago? Are you thinking about that? Is that in your mind? Hey, if Max Crosby doesn't want to be here, could we get an elite corner potentially in exchange? He's a useful trade chip. Try and trade him. He is not going to be on the Packers in 2025. Like, write that in ink. The question really is now, how can you use him as leverage? How can you use him as a trade chip to get something that can help this team get to where they want to go, which is in the same class with the Lions, the Eagles, and the best teams in the NFC? All right, Lily Zhao coming up here on Locked On Packers. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. And then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything's with 100% accuracy. All you have to do is just be there to get the most money guaranteed. No waiting, no worrying, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available TurboTax Live, full service, real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. It's over. The 2024 Packers season ended on Sunday in Philadelphia. They were underdogs, but still a disappointing feeling. Fox 6 Lily Zhao joins us for our final in-season Zhao doing of 2024. Lily, it is a somber day here in Packers Nation. Zhao doing?
Peter, I echo your feelings of it's a tough week. And just we'll get into it, of course, but it's also just the nature of the NFL season, right? It just can end abruptly, and that's exactly what it did. So while it was a nice run this year, the end just feels kind of empty. So I'm feeling a little empty this week, but that's how I'm doing. How are you doing?
Yeah, I feel it. I think it is, if you're a Packers fan of like any age at all, this loss doesn't even register really on the like gut wrenching losses of the last 25 years. Certainly the last 15 years, like going back through like the Ted Thompson era. I don't think this really rates on that, but it does feel bad. And I think it feels worse than last year in a lot of ways. What's interesting to me, Lily, is this team in basically every metric that I care about is better this year than it was last year. So why does it not feel that way?
It's probably because they didn't really pass the eye test. Maybe that's what it was. And just the casual viewer, the numbers might be there to justify X, Y, and Z, but when you're watching them play, especially the last 3 games, it just didn't look good. It looked sloppy. It looked like they got in their own way. And then all of those games ended in losses. So they didn't pass the eye test. And I think, again, that Dallas game last year in the wild card round probably set expectations at a certain point. Mm-hmm. And this team never met them the entire season. So I think going into this year with a lot of the same faces back, some key free agent additions, you're thinking that's going to be the team we see, but better. But they never really got back to that first mark. So I think that also adds to the disappointment of the year.
It is worth pointing out here that the Packers over-under at the beginning of the year was 9.5 wins. It's not like they were expected to be world beaters by the odds makers. So I think you're right. Our expectations were different. And so that matters. It's worth pointing out here though. And this is something I want to talk about later, at a later date, potentially. Tucker Kraft had some extremely pointed words, I thought, about this season, saying he needs to take a bigger leadership role. And when he said I could feel it brewing, that was a red flag to me that the players were going, at least one was going, we're not as locked in as we need to be, or whatever was brewing for him to go. Like we kind of anticipated this is where this would go. That is like damning to me. That
was very interesting to hear. And I do remember even going into, I think it was Bears week or even going into Eagles week, one of the weeks, Matt LaFleur made a mention of, I didn't really see the energy. I didn't really get that juice at practice, and I'm disappointed at how the vibes were. And you're thinking, all right, we're towards the end of the season. The vibe should be at an all-time high here. I mean, we're a playoff-bound team. Why are we not having that same sort of energy and effort in practice? So I don't really know kind of where things kind of fell in that regard in terms of the leadership or how things went in the locker room. But those comments from Tucker Kraft certainly were very interesting to hear. And it just was tough to watch in a game. And I'm sure we're going to get into it. But again, you're only as good as your best players on your team. And when your best players on your team don't perform like they didn't on Sunday, that's just kind of what happens.
Is this where the youngest team in the league thing crops up? Like, we know the team is talented enough, but do they have the right mindset? Do they have the right discipline? Do they have the right consistent work ethic to be a great team? Like, I was not asking those questions all season, but now I'm wondering maybe we should have been.
Yeah, and I think it can go either way, right? I think obviously if they had made that kind of sophomore jump together, we're talking about, this is amazing. They're the youngest team in the NFL, and they're still playing at such a high level. But it has to be, I guess, a consistent effort across the board. And while that wasn't there, that's when I think the veteran leadership, those veteran players in your locker room who have been through it before, who've been through the trials and tribulations of having a postseason, and they've done this before for many years, they give their advice, they get those guys locked in. Not saying Jordan Love and company can't do that, but when you have a veteran who's like a Brandon McManus at his age, who they've been through the ropes before, that certainly helps. But, maybe we're talking about a different season had the entire team kind of made that leap together, but they didn't this year. So that veteran voice probably would have helped.
And they're veterans. Like, it's funny, Josh Jacobs, Xavier McKinney, it's guys that just got here. So you wonder, okay, in a year, with a full year together in an offseason, do you get a bigger leadership role from a Tucker Kraft, from an Evan Williams, a Javon Bullard, an Edgerrin Cooper? Do we see those guys come to the fore a little bit more? Does Josh Jacobs feel more comfortable speaking up? Does Xavier McKinney feel more comfortable being a more vocal leader now? I think those are questions that the Packers culturally are going to have to address this offseason. As we look at the game itself, the performance of Jordan Love, I think, is the thing that everyone wants to talk about. What did you make of Jordan Love's performance on Sunday?
It was tough to watch because I know Jordan, again, there was a lot of expectations, right? And a lot of chatter about you pay your quarterback a certain amount of money. The Packers certainly paid him a lot to be the next guy. And when you're going after Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers, of course, you have this expectation, this reputation to uphold. But as we all know, it does start rocky for every quarterback. That was the same case for Brett and Aaron. You're not going to have a Super Bowl winning quarterback in his first 2 years. It's tough to do. But I think there was a lot riding on Jordan Love's shoulders. We can talk about the injury at the start of the season. Yeah. Maybe that impacted him the entire way through. I'm not sure. But you have to believe, not the confidence portion of it, but just something kind of happened where, they were scoring 30-plus points for 5 straight weeks. And all of a sudden they play the Vikings, they play the Bears. And it looks clunky. It could be a variety of things, but it just looked like Jordan Love was being too reserved, and he was thinking too much about not turning the ball over and not letting it rip because, again, he talked about being a risk and reward quarterback. So now he's not letting it rip, but now he's playing more conservatively, and then he kind of let it rip, per se, against Philly, and that's the end result. You have 3 interceptions. So I think it's finding that delicate balance for him and just kind of getting back in rhythm with his receivers. But that certainly was, I'm sure, not a performance he would like to redo.
It felt like even though the interception numbers were worse in the first half of the season and the overall numbers were better in the second half, I felt like he was playing a lot better in the first half of the season. He was playing a lot freer, a lot looser. And I don't know what to attribute that to. I really don't. Matt LaFleur has also been a big topic of conversation. There's a vocal group, I think a small group, but a vocal group of fans who would like to see Matt LaFleur replaced. My question to them is, with whomst? Because you're not going to replace him with a better coach. All that being said, Lily, I had problems with the way that the game was managed all season. I had problems with the conservative nature of the team all season. Why do you think we got a different version of Matt LaFleur this year than in other years?
I'm not sure. And I wish I had the answers, but I will say this though. When Malik Willis was getting the start, I mean, Matt LaFleur able to design an offense around him with play calls around him that just made it go. So I wonder, can there be kind of this merriment of okay, obviously we know Jordan's our guy, but let's do some things. Let's create something that'll make it enhance his skills, right? And that's what we didn't really see. And a lot of just kind of the same play calling, second and long, we're gonna run the ball up the middle. 4th and 2, we're gonna have a certain call that doesn't work. Or 4th and 3, we're gonna try this, and guys aren't in sync together. So I don't know if it was more of, obviously he had a good play call, but the guys weren't executing. And then you're back to the drawing board of what can we do? So it really is.
Yeah, 3rd and 3, and you have a false start. Now it's 3rd and 8.
Correct, right. And on one drive, you have 2 holding penalties and you're overcoming a 1st and 20 2 times on one drive. So to him, I'm sure he wants to call better plays, but it doesn't help when your guys aren't executing. But to your point, it really was just a dichotomy of saying, we've seen what Matt LaFleur can do at his best. That offense was humming. But then for some reason, the last month, it just looked really disjointed. What's the reason? That's a good question.
All right, more Lily Zhao coming up next on Locked On Packers. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. I'm a parent of 2 young kids. And so when my wife and I get to go out, it's a big deal. And we really enjoy it. And so we don't want to get ripped off just because we only go out every once in a while. Game Time makes it easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. With Game Time Picks, you can find amazing deals, plus see your seat before you buy. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. It felt like they got caught between 2 worlds. That it was sort of like they had the Josh Jacobs offense, which was really the Malik Willis offense, right? And then they had the Jordan Love offense, and they weren't able to marry them. We saw a decrease in play action rate. A lot of the stuff that they gave to Jordan last year to make his life a little bit easier, the RPOs, the play action stuff, they just stopped doing it, and they just said, Jordan, just go figure it out. And what they needed was, if they're going to do that, Jaden Reed to take a significant step forward, Christian Watson to take a significant step forward, Romeo Doubs, one of those guys has to take a significant step, and none of them did, really, right? So I come away going, I'm not really sure what Matt LaFleur was supposed to do when you're expecting some of your guys to come forward. All that being said, I will be honest with you, Lily, I have changed my mind on the wide receiver 1 thing. I have now come to the conclusion that they, at the very least, they need to treat one of these guys like wide receiver 1, even if he's not that alpha Jamar Chase level guy, AJ Brown. They need to treat one of these guys like that so they can just have a rhythm, so they can have a consistency, a continuity, because I feel like that's the part of the game that's just lacking for them right now.
Yeah, and you're right. It just was, how do we make an offense behind Josh Jacobs work with a passing attack that we want to work? And you're right, they couldn't marry them together. But then I think what worked last year and why we didn't need that, or the Packers didn't need the pseudo number 1 receiver, was because everybody across the board was playing well. And again, I think we expected everybody to take that leap together in year 2 as an offense, and that didn't happen. The drops were a big issue. Penalties were a big issue. Injuries were a big issue. So the inconsistencies, guys going in and out, that also didn't help. But you're right, the leap wasn't there together. And because of that, now it's it would be better to have a pseudo number one receiver, a la Justin Jefferson. He's a safety blanket for his quarterback, right? He's reliable. He can stretch the field. He can be a decoy. They need somebody like that for Jordan Love next year to kind of figure out this passing game and get it back to where it was. And not saying these guys that they have in the receiver room won't get it done next year, but can you afford to experiment again like that next season when I think a lot of people are saying, this team's a year away. This team's a year away. All right, the year is here. The offseason is here. So can you afford to try it and experiment again? Or do you go out and either draft a really good receiver or hit somebody in the free agent market to be that top guy?
What would you do?
I think you go get somebody in the free agent market.
So pay T. Higgins, see if you can convince Davante Adams to come back. Like what is appealing to you?
I would say all those options, right? See what sticks, because I know there's a lot of reports out there about T. Higgins, potentially Davante Adams, but I feel like every time the Packers, or there's noise about one guy, the Packers go a completely different direction. And so it doesn't help to bring a veteran receiver in and a guy that has an established reputation in the league, and you know he's going to be good. Build a relationship with Jordan Love and see what you get. And not saying you're not going to be drafting, a really good receiver in the first round that can help you, but why not go and get a veteran player, because that adds to your locker room as well.
I couldn't help but think after Love misses Malik Heath on what would have been a touchdown, I believe that would have made him a one possession game. They have to settle for a field goal. How many times Davante Adams had scored on that exact same route? Just that little out. They get inside leverage from the corner. They're guarding against the little inbreaker slant kind of deal. And it's an out, but he stumbles out of the break. Jordan puts a perfect ball, but he stumbles. And I'm just like, if that's Davante Adams, that's a touchdown. Okay. We have to talk about it. We opened the show with this discussion. Jaire Alexander did not want to talk to the media on locker clear out day, which is kind of like our version of exit interviews, right? The very literal exit interviews in this case. Is this just over? Have we seen the last of Jaire Alexander in Green Bay?
I would say the writing's on the wall, right? Just with what was reported today, just even his thoughts that he's done in Green Bay, the writing is on the wall. And at this point in time, I think the Packers have a big need at cornerback, and that's something they're going to have to address in the offseason. And it just is unfortunate because we all know the player that Jaire Alexander is, the player he still can be once he gets back on the field and is healthy. The swagger he brings, the leadership he brings, just the funny persona he brings as well in the locker room. But it might be time. It might be time that, the Jaire Alexander chapter is done in Green Bay. But that's okay because, maybe that is best for both parties, and Jaire gets on another team where they can use his strengths and the Packers can move on and find somebody else.
It seems like a reset is good for both sides. In this case, there's I know that there's bad blood from fans. I got a lot of responses on the social medias yesterday that was just sort of like good. Like, and whether that's fair or not, I just think the fans are ready. The team seems to be ready. I think he's ready. It could be the best thing for everybody. And I think he could still fetch something. Like, we're talking about a 27-year-old former first-round pick, multi-time all-pro player. I know injuries have been a problem, but like, corners do not grow on trees. I do think there will be a market for him if they want to go that route. It's just kind of a bummer, Lily. Like, this is a player who's meant a lot to this organization. Brian Gutekunst's first draft class, his first round pick. There's this kind of an end of an era, really, if he leaves. And again, to your earlier point, another veteran voice that they're losing that they're going to have to find a replacement for.
Right. I think at the beginning of the year, we were all excited about Jaire and Xavier McKinney, right? The secondary together.
In this Jeff Hafley defense.
Right. And what they could do. And just, the fact that Jaire was excited, he came in and got to know the defense and his new coordinator and just excited about the new year. And of course, the injuries hampered things, but just with how everything has transpired, maybe the clean break is what the team needs. But it certainly is disappointing that, what we saw him do in October was the last of what we see him do in a green and gold jersey. But you're right. It would be losing another veteran voice if he does indeed leave Green Bay. But how do you replace him? Is it the draft? You go out and get somebody in free agency? Again, that corner position, I think, will be a big need for Green Bay this offseason.
All right, last thing here. If all Brian Gutekunst does this offseason is, let's say, he trades Jaire Alexander for draft capital, no player, and they use a first-round pick on a corner, a second-round pick on a wide receiver, third-round pick on a defensive end, let's just say, you will feel how about that offseason?
Obviously, if you draft the right players, right? Great.
Well, yeah, if you get good players, but I just mean in the moment, like you and I are talking on April 30th about, okay, they didn't do anything in free agency, and they just kind of drafted and try to figure it out. Like, how do you think what I'm asking really is, how do you think that is as a strategy for this version of this Packers team?
I think it's a good strategy. Again, we've seen the Eagles do it, right? We see them get stronger via the draft. Now look at them. The Packers, I think, have a good foundation. The guys in the locker room on Sunday night talked about, we have a good foundation. You look at the defense, the guys they brought in this first year under Jeff Hafley. You add a top corner to that mix, that's going to be a talented defense. You add a good pass rusher to that mix, it's going to be an even better defense. You add a receiver to a group that has played together a bunch and has reliable players behind Jordan Love, it's going to be a better offense. And now the question is this offseason, how to again marry the pass with the run behind Josh Jacobs. I think if you add those three key pieces, why not? Why can't this team be a home run hit next season? I think it's more of a fact of, let's just get back to the grindstone and be more consistent. I think this team was very up and down this year, but there was never a marquee win. And so I think that's also why I think a lot of people are saying it really was kind of like a ho-hum season. They didn't get one marquee win, and they had multiple stabs at it and just never could get it done. But I think those three pieces there would make this team even more exciting next season.
I think right now, I feel like this is maybe the most forgettable season of Packers football that I can remember, honestly. Like, I was trying to rack my brain. I was like, is it like 2006, like that first Mike McCarthy year? That's a long time ago, Lily. That's 18 years ago, 19 years ago. So like, it's just one of those funny things. But it does happen. Part of that is because a lot of the Rodgers years were noted by epic playoff heartbreak, and this was not that, right? So it's a little different. Lily, we appreciate your contributions all season long. We will talk to you again soon. I'm sure we will talk to you this offseason, but we appreciate the 2024 Zayu doing comes to a close, but we will talk to you soon.
Loved every season of it, or every day of the season of it, every week of the season of it. It's been enjoyable. So thank you, Peter. This was fun.
All right. Thanks to Lily for joining the show. Great to talk with her as always. We are here still for you 5 days a week, really through the balance of the offseason. We don't go down to a 3 days a week schedule until like June. So I don't want the show to feel like homework. We're going to have fun interviews, bring people on a lot to talk free agency, to talk this team, to talk NFL draft. We are not going to talk NFL draft this week. We are probably not really going to talk free agency this week. We will start our mock draft Mondays this upcoming Monday. I wanted to be waiting until the Super Bowl, but that's not what happened. So here we are. But this week I want to deal with this Eagles game and what is happening with this team right now. Where are they right now? Tucker Kraft, we mentioned, had some interesting things to say. I want to talk more about that. Jordan Love, what do you make of where he is? What's the situation there? Let's talk about that. So plenty to get to here in the upcoming days, weeks, months. Follow me on all the social medias, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on all the social medias plus TikTok for as long as TikTok exists. Locked On Packers. And of course, subscribe to us over on our YouTube page. We'll find some excuses to go live here in the off season. Big stories, free agent signings. Of course, on the draft, we'll be live. Maybe we'll be live in Green Bay. We'll see about that. So subscribe, make sure you never miss it so you can stay Locked On Packers.